Catch on that we're streaming. Come on, there we are. We're streaming. All right, let's start this stream up. I'm streaming game dev, although I'm definitely not the coolest streaming now. Indie dev, paste. So, if you're watching this, you probably shouldn't be. NautilusLive.org is currently streaming a whale fall, so if what I'm doing is even vaguely interesting, you should be watching that live instead, because it is pretty cool. All right. Of course, the only people who would hear me say that are people who are watching this after the fact, since nobody's actually joined the server yet. Still, what we're going to do today is we are going to set up these cables into a system that we can work with. That's going to involve trying to come up with a way to do this stuff that doesn't require us to fight against the ridiculous new prefab rules. But I think our first step is going to be, to create some prefabs that we can use as a basis. Right now we have some prefabs for our ropes, but the problem is that they're kind of just half-assed. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into one of those prefabs. I'm sorry, I ate something weird, and I've been looking at dead whales, so my stomach is not terribly well behaved at the moment, but that's fine. We should have plenty of time. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take this stop point and we are going to drag it back close to where we start. I think I might have just created a divide by zero error there. Nope, it's fine. So we're going to just bring it up to maybe a z of 10, which is just enough for us to, have a rope that exists. This editing is super slow, presumably because it's trying to save after every change. But with this setup here, we've got a much more easily to understand sort of setup that when we clone it, we'll just be able to put it in wherever we need it. With the new helpers that I created to do this stuff automatically, we're not going to have to worry too much about the various things that we might want to do. But I might want to... No, that's all correct. Okay, good. So that's what we're going to have as our rope, but we're going to rename it from rope to rope A. That's going to take about 15 minutes for some reason. And there we have rope A. Now what we're going to do is duplicate rope A to a B and a C. And we're going to just go ahead and create the variants. Oh, that's not how you do it. There we are. So we'll open up rope B here, and the difference between rope A and rope B is, of course, primarily that they look different. So we're going to take this pipe section A and switch it out for pipe section B. B? A? B? B. I think it's B. I can't see what they look like. Yeah, so this is B. So this is going to be the one that looks like that. And that means that we're also going to have to switch out the anchor visuals for the pipe B mounts. And those need to be rearranged a little bit, but we'll need to recalculate the rope before we really know. So this is the wrong material for it, but that's fine for now. Anyway, all we really have to do now is quick-gen, boom, and there it recompiles. The material is wrong, so what we're going to do is switch out the material on the rope display here, because currently it's cable spiral, but what we actually need is cable colorful. Boop. That might not be right either. And then we just need to rearrange this stuff so there's not so much overlap, because the overlap is a little bit ridiculous. I don't think this one has any overlap. Nope, okay. So it's only wrong on the one side. That's fine. So that is more or less how it should look. But you can see how unimpressive this material here is We're probably going to have to change that material later on. I could switch it over to the rope material, which would make it look a little bit more like the rope, but then it wouldn't fit in with anything else. Pink Hair stopped in to say, hey, Pink Hair. So I think I'm going to leave it with this material for now. We can always change it later, but I think we're going to want to have it be a very specific this material, because otherwise we're going to have to worry about redoing it for every rope that exists in the game. It's much better if we just change a material instead of changing every rope in the game. Boop, there. Otto says, smiley face. Pink Hair says, watching the Cable Saga on YouTube has been interesting. Yeah, well, we're making our own now. I was super displeased by my discoveries with Obi Rope, so I just made my own. But for those of you that are here, it still says I've got 0 viewers, but presumably the people who are chatting are in fact also viewers. There's actually a really cool stream of a whale fall on nautiluslive.org, so I would probably recommend that you go watch that instead of me. But obviously, if you don't have any interest in whale falls, then you can stay here. So we're going to just pop open the third, which is going to be where's our prefabs? There you are. Rope C. Here's rope C, and of course the big difference is that rope C is going to be rope C rather than rope A. So I just grab that C. Is it C? It might be D. No, it is C. Okay. So with that in mind, what we can do is tell this to recalculate the rope. Quick, Jen. And that's how it looks, right? Obviously, the material and mounts and stuff are all wrong, so we'll just fix those. First, we'll fix this. It's not going to be the cable spiral. I think we're going to want the cable pitch black for this. And then we'll come over here and we'll switch out these visuals for the pipe C mount. And just make sure that it's the right distance away. Oh, no. Like that. And then over here on this side, same thing. Now you can see that this one is upside down, so we'll just flip it over. And now we're just going to check and see whether this one's upside down. No, that one's the right side up. So that's how we want it to look, except for, of course, this material. Obviously, it's a temporary material, but it needs to be the right temporary material so we can replace it later without having to replace it on a million different objects. There we are. So there, we have 3 ropes all set up more or less properly. Pink Hair says they would have just modeled the cables, but it has been extremely interesting. So I thought about modeling the cables, but that would require me to have a method of putting the terrain into Blender and then modeling it in Blender. And then when I did that in Blender, I would still be doing basically this same thing, which is just, you know, repeat a module along a curve that I'm mapping to the surface. It's like I could do it in Blender a little bit easier, but there would be so much overhead in transitioning it back and forth to Blender and back. You know, it just seemed like this would be easier. Either way, what we've got to do now is close this rope C so that we can look at the other scene. And previously I thought that maybe the scene was getting closed. That's not the case. It's just that they hide the scene behind a back button. So now that we've got the new ropes, what we're going to need to do is start to implement them and put them together. This rope here is in the wrong spot, so delete it. And this rope here, also wrong, so delete that. We can rearrange those ropes later as we see fit. One of the things we did do wrong is that when we created the ropes that I was just putting together, I forgot to add in the correct amount of wobble. So we'll go over here into ropes in the prefabs. Now, rope B needs to have quite a bit of wobble. There we are. And rope C needs to have less wobble than rope A. So we're going to increase this one to maybe 0.5. There we are. That should do. Now, we don't currently have any of those in the scene itself. Theoretically, we have rope A, but I've desynced it because of the way that this doesn't behave properly. This is one of the things that I'm not too sure of. Like, how in the world am I going to handle this if I have to remember to unpack every single thing that ever happens, right? Well, we'll go ahead and try it anyway. So this is a rope, but it's not the right rope. It's the wrong rope. So we're going to delete it. And that means that we're going to want to grab it and hit delete. Very complicated setup, I'm sure you'll agree. Over here in this cube, we're going to want to add in a rope C. This is the thick rope. And as you can see, it's not oriented in a way that makes a particularly huge amount of sense, but that's okay. And we will simply move it into place. And just, I can't really see very well because the lighting is wrong. So we'll just turn the lighting off. And then we will simply move this. Okay, so it doesn't look like it's the right size, does it? Did I end up scaling something here? No? But it's so much smaller than the other object. Why is it so small? Maybe it's just an illusion. So as you can see, the rope isn't really recalculating, which is kind of strange. It should be recalculating constantly. So the question is, what happened? Why isn't it recalculating? So we're going to do a quick gen, and you can see it's not working. My assumption here is that it is not correctly mapping the mesh. Yeah, so here you can see the mesh exists, but it doesn't get displayed properly. So if we take a look at the anchor visual, oh, sorry, the rope display. Here it is. It's down here. So for some reason the position of this is at the wrong place. Now the weird thing about this is I was pretty sure... Didn't I make it so that this was fixed at 0, 0, 0? If we take a look at the other rope, this one where we can actually see it, the rope visual is, oh, it is offset and rotated funny. Oh, of course, because that's local. It's supposed to be at 0, 0, 0 global. That's what's going on. So it says a weird space, but that weird space is actually 0, 0, 0. So if I were to create a reference at 0, 0, 0, that's 0, 0, 0. So this rope display isn't at 0, 0, 0. So there we are. You can see how the grabber is at 0, 0, 0, which means that the local center is actually at 0, 0, 0. But the rope visual, the actual mesh, is being displayed off in space like this, which is correct. But the space it's supposed to be displayed on is twice as far away. So I'm not sure what's going on here. My assumption is that I somehow broke it. So let's go ahead and unpack it and try it one more time. Maybe I just don't understand how that... No, it's still broken. This is interesting. Also, my computer is chugging. So I'm not sure why... If we were to go to 222, yeah, it is almost exactly, it's like 2 and change of a scale off from where it's supposed to be, which, oh, see, look, the scale is wrong on the light mount. Oh, I stuck it inside the mount. I'm sorry, I'm just an idiot, that's all. I accidentally mounted it on something that had been scaled, and that's not supposed to happen. I was trying to put it here, and somehow it ended up inside of the lighting mount. How did that happen? Yeah, now it works fine. brilliant. I told you it was too small, right? I was like, this isn't right. I should have trusted my instinct and been like, no, I'm an idiot. There's something wrong. So that's lined up. And so this is how it looks, right? This is the nice heavy file. And what we can do is we can just grab the stop point and move it to wherever we want it. And where we want it to be is around here. We could put it in as one big rope, but I think it makes more sense to break it into 2 or 3. No, that's scaling. There we are. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag it to, I think, right on the other side of this ravine, right here. And then we can rotate it so that it feels like it's coming in at a good angle, like this. Now, you can see that the rope cuts through the ground in many locations here, and the reason for that is pretty simple. The ground is in the way. If we go over to the rope and we tell it, first off, we're going to have to unpack it because it's a prefab right now and the prefab system is completely broken. Once we've unpacked it, we should be able to tell it to simply create the collision handles. And that should create new handles at the points where there was a collision. In this case, there's only one, but there will be another one every time that we do it. So basically, we can just loop around these various barriers until things seem right. I just want to make sure that I don't accidentally go so far down that I cut through the rock anymore. See that? That's too far. It's okay if this sort of hitches on the side a little bit because that's not unnatural, and I can add maybe a spoke or something if I want it to be there. But anyhow, we just do it again. So, beep, and there's our next one. So we just grab that and move it this way. There we go. And now obviously this is floating well above the seafloor. So we're going to move it down so that it's more or less not on the floor. That would be a little bit too close. It would be a little bit too hard to make it work right. But maybe like there. And you can see that what we've got is a setup where everything chains back in a realistic way. So from here, we'll be replacing that box with a computer of some kind. It just kind of runs along the surface, down the rocks, across the ravines, over and through and across and around. And I can immediately see a problem. There are a couple of problems with this. One problem is that this has too small of a radius. I forgot to tell it that this is a fat rope. So we're going to need to change the radius to 0.2. That's better. And that way it won't have quite so many close calls. Bumpity, 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 bumpity. Not very pretty there. What happens if I turn the wobble down even further? That's better. Yeah, I think that'll be okay. You have to remember that the light is currently off. If I turn the light on, you can see how it fits a little bit better into the feel. So, oh, hold on. Hello? One of my many admirers calling me to tell me that if they give me my credit, if I give them my credit card number, they'll send me on a trip to Aruba for free. Anyway, normally I would like to just not pick up the phone ever, but the sad part is I'm kind of expecting a call from a plumber. And so for the past month, I have been having to pick up every single piece of crappy spam that has come to my phone. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that. There we are. So we're going to drop in another rope C, and once again we're going to just cut it apart. Boop. And then this rope, we're going to want to arrange to finish the job and move on into the next piece of the area. So if we just bring it out like this, there we go. And then we can grab the stop over here and just drag it into the far room. And I think we're going to want to actually, you put rope C inside the stop of the other rope C. Yeah, that's the point. If I move the other rope, I want this rope to move at the same time. So they're all parented to each other. I can lock the locations in space if I need to, but I don't want to at the moment. So this here, I need to put it in this room somewhere, but I'm not really sure what I want this room to look like yet. So we're just going to leave it as kind of a placeholder that we can move around as we need to later on. So for that, we'll just kind of bring it over to here and drop it down a little bit. And maybe I will put a giant fat light on top of it. I think that would work. So we'll create just a light. Do we have a sparking light? Hold on. Do we already have a sparking light set up here? There's a generic spotlight. It's not the sparking light, though. That's fine, though. We'll use it. So the problem with the generic spotlight is, of course, that it's a spotlight, not a light. But that's okay. What we'll do is we will simply move it so it is aligned. Now there should be... Wait, what's going on here? That's not right. That's not the generic spotlight. Hold on. Let's go back over. These are the generic spotlights. Did I not save them? Light mount 1. There it is. Should be saved. There it is. I just grabbed the wrong thing. So let's go ahead and delete the other one because that's not what I want. Boom. Yeah, the scaling issues before were me just dragging and dropping into the wrong thing. I can see why you might have thought I was doing it again. So here's the visual. Here's the light mount, which is an actual physical light mount. Like that. And now the issue with this is that the actual spotlight is very, very small in this particular version. It's only this big. But what we'll do is we'll go ahead and just ramp that way up. What happened? Try that again without accidentally clicking away. There we are. All right, so that should be enough for me to be able to see it. And if we follow this around, you can see how we've got a problem where it dips below the surface. And as before, all we need to do to fix that is to grab the rope here and tell it to create new handles. There's our new handle. And the handle, just drag it until we have fewer collisions. Now, we don't have to have no collisions. We can simply have more handles. So here you can see a collision. We'll just tell it to create another handle. There it is. And then this handle, what we'll do is we'll drag it up to the top of that little hill. That seems good enough. And from there, this says that there's still a collision. There's something a little bit screwy with that. It looks like it might be colliding with itself, but I should have code to prevent that from happening. Anyway, from there it just continues on, hobbledy wobbledy wobbledy, all the way over to these rocks, and then it just passes through these magic rocks, which is not ideal, but we can live with it. Well, none of this stuff is permanent anyway. There's no reason to go out of our way to make it as perfect as possible before we've even settled on what the heck's going on. So with this in mind, what we basically have is a nice fat cable running along this surface over here into the back caves. And then we've got two thin cables dedicated to this room. And then I want to go ahead and just take a look and see how that feels. But first, we're going to have to make it so that there are a few more cables here in the entry room, because this entry room is not supposed to be entirely cable free. So let's create a couple more cables. Right now we've got this set up here. I think I want to move these around, but I need to make sure that when I do, I don't move the rest of the ropes. So when I click on one of these ropes, we've got to go over into the stop and tell it that it is a locked stop. And the same with this guy. So we're going to go over here, and actually we don't have to, because these are not in the same object. My bad. Since they're no longer inside of the same object, they won't get moved with the rope itself. That's just a hack for when they're all inside the same object. But they're not, so we won't worry about it. Instead, what we'll do is we will move this. Is that lined up properly? I can't tell. No, it's not. I guess that must be lined up properly, even though it doesn't look right. Is that really lined up? It doesn't feel lined up, does it? I wish that I had better control over the Unity camera. Jesus. Alright, so here, you can see it's definitely not lined up. Hello? I'm pressing V. This is really obnoxious. Okay, so for some reason I have to select something else before it'll let me... Okay, I have to right-click on the scene view. Whatever. There we are. And then we just do the same thing over here. There we go. I see. There's a loop below. That's fine. So now what we've got is the start bank is now set up with these 3 units correctly aligned. And so we can just move them into whatever sort of facility we end up putting here. Obviously, a big grody bulb is not going to be what we use. But you can see how all of that nicely recalculated everything. And it all just moves straight on up into this plug over here, which didn't move at all because it's not actually connected. They are separate. But I think that what we're going to want to do is change some of the parameters on these 3 to make them a little bit more interesting. So rope and rope 3 need to be wobblier, whereas rope 4 needs to be less wobbly. And then we're going to go ahead and just doop. There we go. That'll give it a little bit more personality. See? All right. So with that in mind, we also need to do some local stuff. And what I think I want to do is have some kind of science kiosk over here. So obviously this is a very temporary physical object that we're using. But I'm thinking that rather than having these come out of a storage tank, that doesn't make any sense, we will have some kind of mounted heavy cabinet for it. And the only question is, do we want to have one that goes off in that direction and one that does everything here? Or do we want to just have one huge one? I guess it doesn't really matter. since we can move stuff around pretty easily. So we're going to go ahead and create another start bank so that we can carry all of these ropes around at the same time again. And then we're going to go ahead and start to drop some prefabs into our new local ropes. This is going to be all rope A's and rope B's. We're not going to use any rope C's here in this local setup. Well, it certainly ended up somewhere kind of random. I think this is a leftover from when I was doing this in another way. I moved it into a weird spot. That's fine. I just move it into a less weird spot. Boom. More or less the right spot. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have one that goes off to the starting position. That's just to kind of pull you in. But we want to make sure that that one going off into the starting position doesn't feel like the others. We want it to feel unique, specifically so that the player doesn't start to feel like they need to follow it again. We want them to remember, oh, that's the one that goes off to where I started. So to do that, we are going to change the material from the spiral material to a different material. First off, we got to unpack it. Then we got to go down here into the rope display and change it from a spiral cable into maybe a straight cable. Yeah, see how that's noticeably different? We could also go for the pitch black. I think that might be a better option. That's fine then. We'll go with that. And then we'll just drag the stop over into that space over there, which we haven't actually finished creating in any sort of meaningful sense. So we can't say that that space over there is, has a value or anything. It's temporary. But we'll go ahead and just slot it in. No, that's scaling. There we are. Now I think we've been rotated a little bit here. Yeah, we've been rotated at 100 degrees, which is a strange number of degrees. We're going to go ahead and slot that into 90. And then we're going to want to create handles so that we can get around that bulge. And there we've gotten around it. We move this a little bit to just give it a little bit of life, like this. And we go. So the idea here is that when the player spawns in, they'll be on this rope, if you see what I mean. Let's go ahead and give it a little bit more life. Anyway, let's go and drag the player over into closer to the starting position. Now, this starting position is going to be where the player gets dropped from the ship when they start their dive. That's the idea. So this open area here, I'm not sure whether it's going to be a short tunnel or just a rock wall, but we can deal with that later. So you can see how far we can see here. We've got this bright blue fog, but it's not set to a very low range. So it's only the most distant stuff that can't be seen. Right now it's very barren. This area is not going to be this barren. But being able to see the far side just barely is what I was aiming for with the starting room. Because I don't want you to feel lost. I do want you to feel drawn to that fog card over there, which is why it's so bright. And then over here there will be another fog card, but you won't be able to go there yet. You have to clear it. There's going to be a way to do that. So that's the basic idea of this rope, right? And then there's going to be, instead of this cylinder, there's going to be some kind of big computer bank. And then we will move along any of the axes we please. This big fat one that goes on into the far distance, or we can take one of the smaller ones that will go to other local locations. So for the smaller ones, I think what we're going to do is we are going to... hello? Hello? There we are. I think what we're going to do is make them just come off of the far side of this game object here. That's not the right game object. This game object here. We're just going to have them be opposite sides of the same bank. So that means that we're probably going to go ahead and take this tank. Don't need it. Boop. Move it over there. And we'll create ourselves a temporary computer bank right here. Unfortunately for us, this rope holder is at 0, 0, 0. So we're going to actually create it inside of this just for the sake of not being annoyed all the time. And we'll pull it out. And then we'll just move this and then scale it up on the axes that we want it to be scaled up on. So we'll just make it like this sort of shape. Now, obviously, having it be flat gray is not the most ideal. We'll go ahead and just slap on a mounting material for it. Obviously, temporary. That's the rope. I want the local start bank. Bring it over and plug it in like so. So you can see that this is the basic idea. It doesn't look like anything yet because we're still just playing around. There's no reason for us to try and create the perfect 3D model before we've figured out what we actually want. But we're getting pretty close to knowing what we actually want here. And I think what we want is a 2-tiered science bank. Pink Hair says, the biggest problem with underwater fog is that you get desaturation a lot closer than you actually lose visibility. Yeah, I've been thinking about that. The way that underwater fog works is really complicated, and I haven't found a good way to do it without using a custom material. I haven't figured out how to use the post effect stack yet. If I could do a good post effect stack that would let me change based on the Z buffer, let me change the saturation of a pixel, that would go a long way. But unfortunately for me, I don't know how to use the post effect stack. I think that I'll need to learn it, but there's not a whole lot of help on how to, largely because they don't want you to. They want to replace it with their new low res or high res post process stack, which isn't good enough. So if we take a look, here is the post process layer, right? We can go on over into that layer. Sorry, there is an object. I'm trying to remember where it is. I think it's use graphics.blit and make the shader do all of the magic. I agree, Pitjay. Do you have any tutorials on how to set that up? And Pinker says, I really hate how they moved the render pipeline so awkwardly. Oh yeah, it's awful. They actually moved all of the shaders into a different directory called obsolete. Great, thanks. Fuck you. But basically, I need to figure out how the post-processing can be applied. And I can't find any help on it because everybody's lost in this mire of whether it's the new version or the old version or the high def or the low def, and it's just like a mess. But I can't remember where I put the effects. I thought they were on the player. There was something on the player that was like... Was it? Oh, here it is. No, that's the player camera. That's the slosh gimbal. That's a post-process layer. There's a volume, a post-process volume, and I can't remember where I stuck it. Pitjay says cat-like coding has something to help with. Cat-like coding does have some good stuff. They tend to overcomplicate. But, okay, so they're using a shader. I guess I don't understand how the shaders work. Because I thought that in order for a shader to get executed, it had to be the shader for the material on the object that was being rendered. And if that's the case, I've got like 10 different shaders. Am I going to have to put the desaturation cycle into every single one of them? See, a post-processing effect seems like an easy fix. It's just... Oh, so Pitche says I should just put a quad in front of the camera and apply the shader to that quad. That makes some sense. Let's try it. Let's go ahead and play around with that for a little while. So here's our camera. Let's go ahead and create another quad. And we will just stick it directly in front of the camera. Oh, that's not moving. That's scaling. Did I go the right direction? I did not. There it is. Whoa. It's inside of the clip distance. Let's go ahead and just turn off the mesh collider and scale it up. So obviously this is not the right shader, but we can do this. All we have to do is drop in a new material and shader of our choice. So we're going to create a new shader here in FX. So shader, nope. Amplify shader. I guess it should be a post-processing stack. I'm not really sure how this works. Let's try it. Let's see what it's got to say for itself. So here is, oh, that's interesting. For the first time ever, it's actually asking me what it wants the file to be named. It's never asked me that before. It always just gives it a really dumb default name. Materials. FX, camquad.shader. There we go. Hooray! And then we go over to the camquad. Tell it to create a new material. Boop. And then we drop that material onto the camquad. Perfect. You can see that that is nonsense, as expected. So although I told it it was a post-process stack, I can see that it's created a standard surface shader here. Not really sure what that was about. Interesting. Unfortunately for us, I'm not sure that the standard surface shader does what we need it to do. Because I'm not sure. So I don't really know how to do this. I need to take everything that's behind this pixel-wise. But no, I don't have to. I can just use the Z buffer. So I can get a depth analysis. But I need to know what color is back there, right? Can I do a desaturation blend? So if we change this from opaque to, well, if I change it to transparent, we're asking for trouble, aren't we? What if I change it to overlay? And Pitche is going on about graphics.blit, but I don't really know how to use it, and I'm not going to try and figure out on camera here. I mean, I used graphics blitz thousands of times when I was young, but obviously this doesn't do graphics splitting. I mean, it does, but it doesn't let me do the graphics splitting. Anyway, what we need to do is just start by making sure we don't have any dumb mistakes. So we're going to set the opacity to 0. And you can see it didn't work. Okay, so if I set the opacity mask to 0, it works, but the problem is that the opacity mask is either opaque or not. It's not semi-transparent. And there's something wrong with this version of Unity and how it does opacity. Yeah, I don't know what's going on here. It doesn't let me change the opacity. It might be because it's an overlay, but overlays can be transparent. They had better be able to be transparent. Try it with just transparent, I guess. That worked. So I've got the opacity set to 69%, and you can see that it is 69% opaque. Problem with this is that it destroys all of the other shaders in the scene that have any transparency. So you can see the fog shader. Well, maybe it still works. Maybe this isn't erroring everything out. So why would this one not error everything out and all the other ones keep erroring everything out? I do not understand the nature of Unity shaders anymore. But I mean, if I just use the z-coordinate depth and I use a desaturate, I should be able to get this to work. So yeah, you can give me back control any day here. I don't need to wait for you to finish unplaying. Jesus. Pink Hair says Graphic Split uses the shader to write directly to the camera's buffer after it renders a frame, so functionally the same as a full screen quad with that shader. Yeah, the question is the math involved, because I know the math I need to do this. I just don't know how to get at the math from here, and that is the question. So what we're going to do is we are going to start by making sure that the Z buffer depth, the depth buffer, works. So we've got screen depth and we got camera depth fade, and I don't know which is which. We've also got surface depth and depth fade. Let's just go ahead and put all four of them in. Depth, 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 depth. Make sure to enable writing depth. So in the camera, it should be already enabled. The question is whether or not this quad needs to do it. I already use the depth effects in the fog, which is why it should already exist. The fog already takes this into account. The special fog card shader, I mean. So what we need to do is have a multiple. So we'll make this the multiple here. Make it a property. Call it depth max. I don't know. And then we'll put in a mult. And put this here, I guess. Camera depth fade seems wrong. Outputs a 0 to 1 gradient representing the distance between the surface of this object and the camera's near plane. So does that mean if it's inside the camera? Well, I mean, this is the opposite of what I need anyway. Gives a screen depth of the scene to the object as seen by the camera. But this is all on the quad, and what we're looking for is what's behind the quad. Yeah, this is what we need. I don't know what this is, but this is what we need here. So a linear gradient representing the distance between the surface of this object and the geometry behind. And I think that what we need is these automatically come with vert position and distance. I think that these actually are already at a default we can use. Let's go ahead and take a look. All right, so we are now using the distance, and I don't really see anything. So if we come down here into the cam quad, I made it a property, didn't I? Why is it not? Oh, there it is. I'm just blind. Okay. So here you can see that as I change the depth, ooh, look at those nans. Love those. It's not changing based on the distance behind. It's just flat changing. So that means that the vertex position must be wrong. So let's go ahead and move the player camera so that I can see something when I'm doing my testing. Yeah, you can give me back control any day now. So if I take this player and I move them up like that, you can see that I've got some depth differential here. The idea being that we should be able to tell right away when we've got something that works. Oh, well, there's the problem. So for those of you that are doing node-based stuff, yeah, you see the error here? You got to remember to hook shit up. That's more like what I expected. All right, so now we're getting the depth properly. And what that means is that we can come over to the quad and tweak these values. And so you can see that these are not one directional. The opacity goes negative in some cases. It might be a color problem. Let's go ahead and change the color from transparent black to red. So we are getting some negative transparency here. That's the blue. And here's the positive transparency. So this distance is really, really far back, which means the opacity is higher than 1. I think that we need to just clamp it. So we're going to just put in a clamp. Yeah, better. Pink Air says, reminds me of a problem with the lens flare stream. They stopped putting the default lens flare. Yeah, I think someone told me that. If it wasn't you, I'm a little surprised. So I'm definitely thinking about whether or not I want to use the lens flares as they exist. So anyhow, you can see here what we've got is the ability to write a color based on a specific depth. Now, obviously, this is really oversensitive, but you can see how I can adjust it to be exactly as sensitive as I need it to be. Then I'll need some tweaking to make it worthwhile. But you can see we're clearly in hell here, which is fine. Now, I don't know what's with the flashing. I know what's with the flashing. I have turned illumination on here. So what we want here is we don't want any lighting on our cam quad, because that is the speckling of the lights on the surface. So let's just switch this over to, can we switch this over to unlit? No, we can't, can we? It's just going to be a pain in the ass. What happened here? Oh. So what I'm thinking is turning off the lighting manually. We should have the ability to change the lighting mode. I can't remember how, though. Light model. Unlit. Yeah, fuck you. And then we'll just go ahead and mark it as an emission. There we are. So it's the same deal, but this time it's unlit, so we're not going to have any of those weird stripy flashes. Now, this is a very hellish sort of environment, and I'm not sure what's with the moire. We seem to have a moire over everything. I'm not sure if you can see that on Twitch. Oh, we were above the surface of the water, first off. Still, it's fine. So this red, the scene fades to blue, so you know quite well that this red is having an effect. But what we really want to do is, instead of this red, we want to desaturate. And I'm not sure how to do that. So if we come down here into the advanced blend, boom. What we can try and do is change it from an alpha blend to something else. The problem is that the kinds of blends that we're given here are pretty limited. Additive, multiplicative, particle additive. What we really need is a custom blend. But the problem is that the operation that we need to do probably isn't available. Add, subtract, reverse subtract, min, max, logical, clear, logical set, copy, no op, invert, and NAND, NOR, XOR, equiv, Logical and reverse and inverted or reverse and or inverted. Don't really know what these do. So what we're trying to do is come up with a desaturation, which means I'm going to change this to a gray, just so that we can see it. But if we take a look at how this actually feels, I think we're going to need to multiply. This depth max needs to be substantially smaller. So we're going to add another float. I'm sorry that I've only got one screen, so you can't really see what I'm doing very well. We're going to go ahead and multiply everything by 0.01, just so that the number that we pick can be something higher than 0.003 or whatever, by adding in an extra small number. By adding in an extra small number, we're going to be able to change that depth max to a number that makes some sense. So the blue is the default fog. And then as we bring in the gray, you can see that that gray isn't really changing the... it's not desaturating, it's just overwriting. But now that we've got it overwriting, what we might be able to do is change these values. Okay, so Pinkhair says you want to split it into different channels and fade them at different rates. Can I do that? Oh, you're right, I can. Look at that. So I can change it so that it only masks one channel. Oh, that was interesting. For some reason, the channel isn't behaving like I thought it would. So this is when I only mask alpha and blue. This is when I mask alpha, blue, and green. And this is when I mask alpha, blue, green, and red. But I don't know whether or not I am going to... What? That's not right. There it is. But I don't know whether or not I'm going to be able to... If I unmask just blue... We were getting a weird result last time. See this? Ah, there we are. So it works. It just takes a second. But I don't know whether or not I'm going to be able to do them separately. I don't see any way... I don't see any way to do more than one blend mode operation. The only way I would be able to do them separately is if I had 3 different panes, or 3 different materials on this pane, one for each of R, G, and B. And in which case, that would be more like a color grading post effect, in which case it might be easier to use the color grading post effect with a Z buffer, but I'm not sure how to do that. It's one of those situations where you're like, I know exactly what I need to do mathematically, I just don't know how to wedge it into this framework. Look at this, look at this. There's a source alpha saturate function. Let's see whether or not that works. Wah! Let's see, do we have a source alpha saturate on this side? Wah! Wah! Look at that, perfect. It's exactly what we want, right? So we're going to have 1 minus source alpha here. Okay, so that's like super dark. It looks like it's just turning black. I can't really... Oh, look. This is what I want. except for it's the opposite of what I want. Which means that was reverse subtraction. So normal subtraction looks like this. You can see the hilarious problems we've got. But that's the thing. You can see how the sky back there is turning white. The sky should be the furthest thing that's away from the geometry. Or it's a 0. Maybe that's what's going on. No, it can't be. Because there's no holes. Oh, there is a hole. We're above the water line. Okay, hold on. This here is not going to happen in the real game. I'm not getting anything out of this. It's just erroring out. The thing is it because it's the wrong color? Or because I'm doing the wrong thing? Or what? Because the reverse subtract and the subtract... Well, let's go back into the reverse subtract, I guess, and see what's up. I don't actually know what that means, reverse subtract. Does that mean that it's subtracting the source from the definite, from the... Look, so that's actually not... That's not wrong. All right, so let's take a look at this. Yeah. So it looks like it's just a flat fog filter, doesn't it? It doesn't look... Well, let's continue just a little bit more because I want to get below the surface. There we are. So the problem is that that's not... Ugh. And maybe that the source alpha saturate isn't what I thought it was. Because what I was hoping was it would just desaturate things. Let's go ahead and... That had no effect, okay. Maybe I should just go ahead and Google what reverse subtract does. Clearly that is not a reverse subtract. Let's go ahead and try and search for it. So, what's it called? Rev sub, blend up rev sub. Subtract source from destination. So I'm trying to subtract the saturation of the source from the destination. I'm not sure why that would turn it red. Well, let's go back over there and try some more stuff. There is some combination of random bullshit that will make this work. So, well, this is back to being a straight subtract. And you can see it does nothing. There's also a min and a max, but I'm not sure. Maybe I can set this to be like gray? Well, there is a source color value. So if I change the source color value, what I can do is I can make the source color change, but you can see that what we get at the result here is a wall of fog. And that's strange because it shouldn't be. We've got destination color and source color as separate options. Oh, this has some potential. It doesn't seem to actually work in the way I thought it would. So one of the issues is that when we send it an opacity alpha, it apparently is... Let's try this. Let's send this over to the source alpha here. We can actually change the blend alpha separately. So we could try and find the right tone. So here you can see the fog that we get. So what if we change this to the source color, and then we change the blend alpha to the alpha blend? So basically we're treating the RGB and the A channels separately. There we go. So if we do it like this, oh, it didn't do jack shit. That's interesting. Because the alpha doesn't matter, does it? My bad. Sorry, I'm trying to get this to work and it's really confusing. I wish I could just tell it the math to use, because I know how to do that. But you can see that this doesn't change anything anymore. That's because the RGB and the alpha are separate, and for some reason the blend alpha is not working as I thought it would. Why can't I just figure out how to make this turn gray, goddammit? Well, that turns it gray. It also does it in exactly the wrong order. Maybe if I just switch this to destination color and this to source alpha, it will magically work. Nope. I don't think I can make this work. I've just spent an hour of your life, if you've watched this, fucking with things you can't see off the left-hand side of the screen because I can't figure out how to do it. Oh, Pink Hair says that it's just a clamping function. Yeah, that's true. I know what I need to do. I just don't know how to do it. Which is a rare situation for me. I'm used to knowing how all of this stuff more or less works, but instead I've found this really ridiculously uncomfortable situation where I can't get anything to work. So I can separate it into a bunch of different channels, and I can have it so that each channel fades out at a different rate. But I'm not sure that that's actually going to help me. So here's what it looks like with the red channel fading out. And you can see that what actually happens is that the red channel is the one that doesn't fade out. But that's because this is set to a medium gray, and that would be like, in this case, a medium red. What I actually want to have happen is I want it to fade to an actual gray. I want it to stop having color. I want it to desaturate. And so here you can see that now it actually gets rid of the red, but that actually means more saturation happens, because the desaturation happens because the red is at a moderate amount. If I could change this over into like an HSV, that would be real easy. It doesn't seem to be possible. I don't know if I can do it like this. I think that we're going to be doomed to not have this work in this way. I can overlay based on how far back something is, and I can have that have a function, like a ramping function, that's not linear. But the problem is I can't overlay with a different saturation. I can only overlay with a color. So surely they have some grab fast function. Well, I'm not addicted to Shader Forge. It's just super easy. If I could do it using actual code, I wouldn't mind. My instinct is to use a post effect. I can't seem to find my post effect. I put a post effect, and that's not it. Let's delete that. There is a post effect setup somewhere. I just don't remember where I put it, and I didn't name it something smart, apparently. I might not have created a post effect. I might have a situation where where I deleted it on accident, and that's why there's nothing named properly. Let's go ahead and get rid of this quad temporarily. And then here in the camera, this is supposed to grab the layer, and it should, but I don't know if the post effects still exist. I might have deleted the object that was doing the post effects. No, that doesn't tell me anything. So, for example, I should see a bloom, and I should see so I can see a bloom. Somewhere in here there is the post effect. I just don't know where I stuck it. What idiot put this together? And why didn't they mark their post effect layer? Oh, there it is. All right, so here's our post-processing volume. So the way that Unity did, I don't know if this is still true, but with the version I'm using, the way they do post effects is you create a post effect volume, and that means that you can like wander from volume to volume. But by default, what I've done is I've just attached a global volume to the camera gimbal. I'm not sure why I put it on the camera gimbal, but as long as it's named, I don't give a shit. So here you can see the color grading. And what I need to do is I need to have the color grading actually take depth into account, and I just don't know how to do that. But in theory, color grading is a script. Unfortunately, I'm not sure how to access this shit. See, in theory, all of these are scripts. And if I take a look, maybe that's something that the cat-like coding tutorial is all about here. It says it's using the same approach that we did in the Bloom tutorial. How to add support for bloom. Setting the scene. See, this is the thing I don't like about cat-like coding. Everything that they do is like, oh yeah, and then this uses the techniques we learned in rendering 14, and then in rendering 14, it's like, oh, this uses the techniques we learned in rendering 8, and then you go to rendering 8, it's like, oh, this uses the techniques you have to learn in rendering 3, and it's like, you're telling me how to build a game engine, you're not telling me how to solve my problem. Yeah, I would have to go through this for like 4 or 5 hours and read through every single one of the tutorials to figure out what the fuck they're doing, because they don't tell me where they're hooking shit in. They just say, you hook it in like you did back here, and then you go back there, you're like, oh, well, you have to hook it in the way you did back here. So it's very, very hard for me to figure out what's going on. He does use a blit, but unfortunately he doesn't tell us how to set that up. He doesn't tell us if it's on he puts it on the camera. And then he starts to talk about like pinhole cameras and shit, which doesn't really make any sense. So I think that he's putting this on the camera as a shader with an on-render image reference to it. So if I were to pull that in, basically, we use 2 render textures and then we pulse through them both. But that seems super expensive. So it looks like the way cat-like coding is doing it is they are creating a mono behavior on the camera that has an on-render image call in it. And then that would be an on-render image with a source and a destination render texture as arguments, with the idea being that you would render one to the other using graphics blit with the material. And the material would contain references to the shader. And the shader can be programmed or created as you see fit. And that's a possibility. I would have to do it off camera because it would take me quite a while. But basically what you really need to do is just have a shader that looks for the Z coordinate on the Z buffer and then just desaturates a color. The problem is that I'm not sure that the shader can access the Z buffer if you use it like this. I don't believe the Z buffer is embedded into the render textures. I'm not sure if it'll have free access to the Z buffer without that. Okay, so Pink Hair says, cat-like coding is good if you follow the entire course, not so great for reference at all. Yeah, and that's my problem. Whenever I'm looking to do something, I know bits and pieces of it, but I don't know the whole shebang. And so to use cat-like coding, I have to go back and learn all of those bits and pieces again, and that takes 10 or 15 hours. And then there's like one little tip, and that's the tip I needed. So it's like, oh, great, I just spent 15 hours learning something I already knew. And that's not a flaw in cat-like coding. It's just a flaw in my needs and the way that cat-like coding is set up. And that's why everybody's like, cat-like coding is great. And I'm like, not to me. It's one of the few tutorials that doesn't actually teach me the one thing I need. Still, if you want to learn that stuff, go right ahead. It's interesting that cat-like coding doesn't use the drag and drop node-based editors, because that's something that is becoming basically the norm. And so by not covering that, they've made a specific choice to stay not obsolete, but old school. which, to be honest, is fine when you're trying to do something like this, and I can't get access. There's got to be a way. Hold on. Let's go ahead and try one more time here. Putting aside... Oh, come on. Putting aside the custom blend modes and shit, can I get the color of the layer behind us? Grab screen color? Do you think that would work? Here's a color mask. Here's a fetch color pyramid. Fog and ambient colors. Grab pass is what Pink Hair says. Grab screen color. Okay, so let's go ahead and this here, we're going to change the render type to transparent. That should undo all of the nonsense we created. And then here, what we've got is this grab screen color. In theory, I don't know. We'll have to try a couple of things and see what happens here. What we're going to do is we're going to first just grab the screen color and make it our emissive color. And the reason for that is simple. I want to make sure that we're actually grabbing the screen color. So if it turns black or something strange, we'll know that it's not the right setup. So if we come down here into the quad and we flip it back on, there we go. You can see that it looks the same, which is a really great, yeah, good. So that means that we are probably grabbing the screen color properly. So what that means is that what we can do is we can desaturate. Is there a desaturate? There is a desaturate. Drop this and then drop in this. Oh, no, wait, we can just desaturate it completely, can't we? I think that I actually don't know whether or not fraction should be 0 or 1. That's not something I happen to know off the top of my head. But we can use both. We can just try it both ways and see which one it is. Oh, look at that. Beautiful, beautiful. Blend mode was the wrong approach. You are 100% right. Congrats. Only problem here is that the depth max is really sharp. You see how fast that changes. But let's give it a shot. Let's take a look. So this turns it into gray, but it doesn't affect the blue fog in the distance because the fog actually takes place after this, I guess. Still, let's go ahead and modify this until it feels like it's a little bit better. So right now the depth max is, yeah, so we can actually do something like this, where you can see it turns gray. I'm not 100% sure that I want it to turn gray. I may want it to turn blue. Well, let's pop it up a little bit heavier here. You can see how it kind of advances towards the camera, but there's a real sharp cutoff where it's not. It's very linear, and the result is this ridiculous hyperlinear setup. So if I were to take this clamping, this multiplication, this clamp, all this jazz, I could. Okay, so I'm thinking about the best way to do this. Right now I'm using a really, really silly method here. What I actually want to do is clamp. I've got to figure out how to turn off that autosave. It is slowing everything down. We're going to clamp here. All right, so what that does is it gives us a depth max that's actually a physical number, and that will slap us up against 0 to whatever. And over here, what we're going to do is we're going to remap the clamped value. So the old max is here. Actually, I don't even think we need to clamp it if we're going to be doing a remap. The remap should clamp it for us. Fuck you. Give me control back. How do you turn it off? I can't believe... let me go ahead and just look that up before I get more angry here. What is the name of this? It is Shader Forge? Yeah. No, it's not. It's... Amplify. Amplify shader, editor, autosave. Missing autosave, missing autosave, missing autosave, missing autosave. Oh, for fuck's sake. Why do I even bother to search for you? Apparently it doesn't exist. Great. Okay, so we don't need this color for now. We'll just delete it. It's getting in our way. And then the max new and max old, 0 to 1. That's correct. And then we'll just pop that into the opacity straight up. We don't need the other floats or the clamp or anything, but this is still a linear map. And what we can do if we would like to do it is to give it the power. Which defaults to an exponent of 1 for some reason. We'll give it an exponent of 2. And by having it multiply itself by a power, we should get a different result. Now what we've got here is a... I think this must be big negative numbers. The depth fade should give us values that... A depth max is only 1 point something, but... What we're getting here is... So if I were to change this depth max, you can see how it goes away. We seem to have it inverted, is what I'm seeing here. Oh, of course it's inverted. Are you an idiot? You just remapped it from 0 to 1, and you wanted to remap it from 1 to 0. I'm clicking on you. Oh, for fuck's sake, stop autosaving. No, that didn't change it. Maybe I'll just do a 1 minus. In 45 minutes, because it autosaves every time I click. And I'll leave it as linear for now. No, this is still wrong. Why is this wrong? Is it not clamping? Yeah, I thought it was clamping and it's not clamping. Is that what's going on? That must be it. We also need a depth min. Give me back my controls so that I can do stuff and you can stop being in the way all the time. And we'll go ahead and create a clamp. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to put the clamp here. Ah, there we are. So, yep, it wasn't being clamped properly, and that was the problem. So, obviously this blue fog is the actual in-scene fog. Right now our depth max is set to 14 meters, which is not as high as our depth min, which is why we're getting no results. But if we increase our depth max, There we go. You can see it's backwards. So 1 minus was wrong. I was just hallucinating. That's fine. In the future, I will try to hallucinate less. I'm not trying to save the scene. I'm trying to save the script. There we are. So you can see that what we've got here is a setup where we can change where the ramp is, and that'll push it out, and then it'll snap. You see that? And that's fine. We don't have to be perfect about it. But I think that what we're going to want is like something like this. And that should do. That should be fine, right? I think that's fine. Only problem is I don't want it to desaturate. What I actually want it to do is saturate towards a color of my choice. So we've got the desaturate, and now we need to do the resaturate. So we actually need to do is bring this in, and then we need to do an HSV to RGB. The only question is how expensive this is, because it might be like super expensive. I'm not sure. And so what we're going to try and do is we're actually going to bring the saturation down to a target value, and the everything except for the value. So all right, so we're doing this double conversion to HSV space and back. And what that should allow us to do is to set this to any color we want. So the hue here can be set to whatever value we feel is appropriate. And I think that we'll just go with roughly the same kind of blue. But obviously we don't want it to be a saturation of 1. Anyway, let's change these into sliders. So we can actually do our job a little bit easier. There we are. So instead of getting that flat gray, we can now go with a kind of blue. And we can always adjust the exact tone of blue like this, so that later on we can create like a purpley blue for those evil caves of blueness. All right, so this is more or less what I wanted it to look like. There is still plenty of stuff we can do to polish it. I think that this needs to be more like 300 meters. Yeah, that's probably a little bit better. And the fog, being such a violent color of blue, probably needs to be tweaked. So we'll go over here into the fog setup here. And you can see that this color is, that's the ambient color. We're looking for the fog. You can see this fog color is very blue. And what we really want to do is bring it like here. Far less saturated, right? Like this. There we are. That's much better. Now, if you're wondering why the heck was it so vivid previously, that's because I was using Aura fog, and I was trying to get it to behave well. And the way that the Aura fog was working was that it was saturating. I couldn't get it to stop saturating. So I was like, well, in order for this to even come close to looking right, I'm going to need to have saturation. I'm going to need to have that kind of saturation on the default fog as well. But obviously, I've just given up on that fog, and instead we'll go with something that's a little bit like this. Might still be too saturated. We'll work on it. We'll figure out how we want it to be. But you can sort of get a feel for what I'm trying to create here. I may want to have this effect also do the fog. I can use the depth pass in 2 layers. I can create a fog layer and So if I were to do that, then what I would do is I would come over here to the quad. First off, I would turn the fog off in 15 or 20 minutes. There we are. So with the fog off, what I can do is I can have the shader I just created also do the fog. And basically, the two pieces of this puzzle are two separate distance ramps, one for desaturation and one for fog. Now, ideally, the shader thing would support an actual ramp, like a curve I could put in. It doesn't, though. So unfortunately for us, we are going to have to do it with basic maths. So what we're going to do is over here, this value, we are in fact going to replace it with a lerp between that value and a fog value. So let's make some space. And we're going to need another property here. There we are. And so we're going to want to do a lerp between A and B with this as our alpha, and that's going to be the value. And that should allow us to create a completely opaque fog. Of course, although I've hooked that up, that's not actually how we're going to do it. That's just temporary, right? So we're using 300 here. If we bring that down to 100, you can see that it is an opaque fog. And what happens is that we lose color and then we lose definition, which is very similar to how it works with just an ordinary fog. But we would like it to lag at a different rate. So what we actually need to do here is this clamping and this remapping, we need to duplicate those because we need to do the exact same thing. But instead of what we have here, we're going to just bring in a multiple of that. Oh. It's starting to get a little bit spaghetti-y. And that should have a nice delay off the back of the desaturation. See that? So now we get the color fade before we get the fog fade. See? Now, with this in mind, our current fog value is quite high. We can drop it so that it's black. We can make it white. And of course, the actual fog hue that we use is the same as the hue for the rest of our water. So here you can see we can change it. We can also change that saturation value. For now, we're going to go with a nice kind of dim shade like this. And I think that that's pretty close to how I want it to look. And I'd like to thank Pinkhair for setting this up for me, even though he doesn't know he did, because I wouldn't have thought about doing this for quite a while if I didn't have someone around telling me to do it. Of course, I had some help from several viewers today, but I'm not 100% sure. Let's go ahead and lower the ranges, change the ranges a little bit here. So we're going to just make this like a 20 and a 100, I guess. I'm not 100% sure that this is probably not how it's going to be in the long run. I'll probably change it here and there, make things a little bit different. For example, this is linear, and it's not underwater. I believe underwater it is distinctly non-linear. The other problem is that I've turned off the scene fog, which means that changing the fog values on the fly means editing the cam quad shade. settings, which is something I can do. I just haven't set it up yet, so we're not going to be able to do it yet. So the other issue with this approach is that it apparently breaks most transparent objects. We'll see. It doesn't seem too bad right now. You can see the fog card that we just went through was doing a little bit of panicking there, but that's not too bad. It wasn't impossible. Yeah, this is okay. With the knowledge, of course, that it doesn't have to go to gray. It can go to anything I want it to go to. It's just going to gray because that's how I set it up. And that's not as gray as you think. That is, in fact, a soft blue. It just doesn't feel like it because it's the only color. And you know how your eyes work. So the idea is that if you get up close to something, like the ground or something similar, and you get a lot of some color other than blue, then the background will really pop as blue, just because that's how your eyes interpret color. But for now, that's all we're going to get. As we come over here, this is where the fog shifting setup is, and we should see the lights shift pretty soon here. They probably already did, and it's just that they're not set up right anymore. But either way, the fog can't be changed because we have... No, we're not using the scene fog. We're using this fog we just created. I think that we're probably going to want to put in some stepped fog. We'll talk about that some other time. So you can see that here, the fog, this gray fog, it doesn't feel quite right, and that's just because this is built to be in the deeps. It's built to be black. So if we take this fog value from 0.196 to black, this is how it's more supposed to look. And see how that pops nicely. The range of the fog still needs to be adjusted, but feeling okay about it. We'll probably create... No, that wasn't what I wanted to do. Probably create a bunch of stuff, custom stuff there, but that can wait. I had intended to do more machine stuff, and I didn't. That's okay. Everything is starting to come together. It may not feel like it to those people who watch me doing it, because it's like 2 hours a week, but everything is starting to come together, and it won't be too long before this level starts to become eye candy-ish. You'll be surprised at how fast it turns from bland open spaces into eye candy once you start to actually buckle down and create the level part. But I needed to make sure that we had the connective tissue that we needed. Pinker says, how are you doing the caustics? A giant projector? I'm actually doing the caustics with a light, which might not be the best choice. It's just a directional light with a cookie, and then I just sit there and I wobble it. I haven't decided whether to replace that with a projector or not, because I'm not sure whether projectors actually still work properly. I've had a lot of problems trying to use technologies with the new versions of Unity. Old things I might have done sometimes just stop working because of an update to Unity, and I'm never really sure which ones are going to stop working. I know that lights won't stop working, so that's why I'm using a cookie. But if you think that it would be better to use a projector, I can certainly do that. Another nice thing about the caustics being lights is that I can have the shadows actually properly block them, which is nice. It does, however, mean that there are more lights being shadow cast, which drives the the cost of the scene up. Pinker says that he's had a lot of problems with projectors, which is why he was asking. Yeah. Projectors seem to be one of those situations that Unity isn't really interested in keeping alive, so they barely work, if at all, at least as far as I can tell. Anyway, I'm going to stop now. My voice is giving out. Thanks so much for stopping by, everybody, and I will see you folks on the next week or so, next Saturday or next Wednesday. Just going to take a quick little screenshot, I suppose, just to make it so that, some of the some of the new tech gets screenshotted. I want to get the sun. Let's move so we're not directly on top of the. That's fine. All right, Pink Hair, if you're free, feel free to come by. Every time you do, I'd make something I couldn't have made without you hanging around, so I can't say you're unwelcome. You are very welcome. Of course, everybody is, even just the people who are not actively doing tech support. It's just that I happen to need a fair amount of tech support. All right, well, thank you very much, everybody. I will see all of you folks next time around. Or some of you, at least.